Yeah, hopefully you open it every day. But some of you just do this. All right. Let me get to the part the Lord wants me to see today. Yeah. That's not like this, which is I'm giving out money. This is a cell phone. Okay? So hopefully you have a Bible. Revelation chapter 2. The book of the Revelation, not Revelations. It's one revelation, one revealing, one apocalypsis, pulling back the curtains and seeing Jesus for who he is, and sometimes even seeing this crazy, mysterious future ahead of us. Right? In the last couple of weeks, we have begun walking through the book of the Revelation. We may not get to the end of it together. Maybe Jesus will come next week. I don't know. But we can slowly walk through this and learn things that we can use today. Now, often when we come to the book of the Revelation, people get all, nervous. They start reading it, and some people read halfway through and get scared, don't want to read anymore. Or some people read every page and see these great, descriptions of all this kind of stuff, and then they want to put all kinds of meaning and stuff to all these things, and count how many toes the demon has, and count, there's some good parts with symbolism, but as we go through Revelation, and as you read maybe even for yourself, my encouragement, even though there are all kinds of positions and all kinds of different ways that come at that book, I try to take it as literal as possible, unless there is some necessary thing that says I shouldn't. Okay? So there was the book series Left Behind several years ago, and when they wrote that book, they did a little bit of both. They took it very literal, and then sometimes added the symbolic into it. But for our part, man, I can study this stuff all day long and come up with great and fanciful ideas, but I, as much as possible, want to be able to read it for what it is and do it. Remember back in chapter 1 where it says, "Blessed are those who read this aloud," and that's what we're trying to do, and those who actually do what it says. Now, when it's talking about giant creatures and beasts coming out of the ocean and that kind of stuff, can't do anything about that. I got nothing, right? I don't even have a fish, like a little. I got none of those. But what I can do is with sincerity follow God and trust him over everything else. And so in this beginning part, we saw at the beginning, John was giving the description in chapter 1. Hey, this is who I am and this is what I've seen. And Jesus himself in all his fullness and power came and told me the things that are, the things that will be and coming in the future. Okay? Then we get to chapter 2, and Jesus himself says to John, now John, write down these messages. I want you to send these messages to 7 key churches in the region. I want you to write them and tell them a few things. And at each one of these letters that Jesus dictates to John, he gives a description of himself. He says something good about him. Don't you remember the 1 Minute Manager and some of those things from years ago? They always say, if you're going to critique someone at work, you give them 1 minute of praise, 1 minute of criticism, and then Jesus could have laid that out for him, right? He gives them a commendation at the beginning. And then he says, first he describes himself, he gives a commendation, and then he says, but I have this against you. And this is how you can fix it. And blessed are those who listen and actually do this stuff. And so each one of these 7 sections that we're seeing in this part of the Revelation, Jesus is following that template in each one. And as you recall from a couple weeks ago, the letters were written and sent out in order following the mail route through that area of Turkey, today Asia Minor. So it started off in Ephesus and Smyrna and Thyatira, or Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And as it follows that mail route, we're getting to see these churches. Another way that somebody looks, and scholars look at this passage, to say that these churches might be time periods of the church. The time of the martyrs is that first time period. And then the church holds on, and then they go through apostasy and all this kind of stuff. And it could be that. But I want us to pay attention and listen to what Jesus is saying to the church of then, because in many ways it could be the church of today. And there are things in each one of these 7 churches that we read about that are really taking place in some church someplace on the planet. Okay, you guys with me? So, in Revelation chapter 2, I'm reading from verse 12 through verse 17, and I'm reading from the Christian Standard Version. It says this. It says, "Write to the angel of the church at Pergamum. Thus says the one who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding on to my name. You didn't deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to place a stumbling block in front of the Israelites, to eat meat sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. In the same way, you also have those who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. So repent. Otherwise, I will come to you quickly and fight against them with the sword of my mouth." Wow. "Let anyone who has ears to hear, listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give him a white stone, and on the stone a name is inscribed that no one knows it except the one who receives it." Wow, what a powerful thing for us to talk about this morning. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, you are so good to us. In the midst of driving these days of life, and the fog may be surrounding us, you are the one who lights the way. You are the voice behind us that says this is the direction. You are the one who gives us calm assurance in the midst of difficulty and the storm. And this morning, God, as we share these minutes together, I pray that you pull back the covering, you pull back the curtains on your word. Help us to see Jesus for who he really is. Help us to be moved and shaken, so much so that when we leave this place today, we want to follow you all the more. And God, this morning, I thank you for being good and kind to us. And God, I pray that you allow me to take a step back and allow Christ and the cross to be seen. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just a little bit of a review before we go on to this church, the church of Pergamum that we're going to hit today. And I probably be good for me to slide over. Now, this thing right here, it's heavy. All right. It might help most of you be able to see what's on the screen over there. Move my things here again. All right. So in the last couple of weeks, we talked about these churches. So just to review, the church of Ephesus is the loveless church. And basically, Jesus said, hey, you guys are doing a lot of good things, but their rebuke was they left their first love. They moved on from the things that were important at the first. And Jesus exhorted them, he encouraged them, he challenged them, remember. Can you say that with me? Remember. All right, ladies, why don't you do it? Let's go.
Remember.
That's pretty good. Gentlemen?
Remember.
Come on, boys. One more time. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Remember.
That sounds good. All right. I always like it. I'd love that my voice stayed down here. If you go, remember, that kind of thing. That'd be cool. Okay, so the next one was the church of Smyrna. And the church of Smyrna was the persecuted church. This church, Jesus said to him, hey, you guys have done some great stuff. And he had no rebuke for them. There was nothing bad he could say to them. You guys have put up with the persecution and the difficulty and the hard times. I'm proud of you. And all he said to them was, don't be afraid. Because that church was dealing with great persecution. They could have lost their lives. They had seen people who had died. In that church, their great leader, years later, one of the great leaders, Polycarp, one of those guys at that church, gave his life as a martyr in the Colosseum there. And these people were encouraged to don't be afraid. Should I start with the ladies first? All right, ladies, do it again. Say, don't be afraid. Ready?
Don't be afraid.
That's what Jesus told the church of Smyrna. Gentlemen, your turn.
Don't be afraid.
All right, by the end of this, you guys will be good. All right, so today we're talking about Pergamum. And Pergamum was a compromising church. I'm going to run through this and then we'll talk about the church itself. It was a compromising church. Jesus said to him, I know your works. I know where you live. You guys are living in a bad spot, in a bad place, close to the synagogue of Satan, and you hold fast to my name. Guys, good job. But here's the bad thing. There's some among you and some and a lot in your city who pay attention to false teachings. You get out of bounds. There's a lot of immorality, even among people in the church. And he exhorts them to repent. Guys, I want you to do that one first. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Repent.
Say it like an Old Testament prophet. Okay? 1, 2, 3.
Repent.
Yeah, we'll work on that. All right. Maybe I can get a couple of you guys stand out in front of Walmart one week and practice. Repent. Or you can stand near the home section of Home Depot and say, repaint. Wrong thing. All right. Jesus told them to repent. And he said, repent from the immorality. Repent from allowing and tolerating sin. And to those who do, those who persevere at the end, there's a reward, and we'll go into that here in just a minute. But let me tell you a little bit about Pergamum. Pergamum was an interesting city. Every time I used to hear the name Pergamum, I always thought Pergo floors for some reason. I don't know why. The name just sort of went with it. But Pergamum was a powerful city. Smyrna and Ephesus, the cities we've already talked about, were like right on the water. But Pergamum was about 12 miles in, and even going back early in the Roman Empire, Pergamum was like, hey, Rome, we're all in with you guys. Now, we have some Greek people here, and we have a history in the Assyrian Empire, but Rome, we're with you guys. And as Rome continued to grow, Pergamum continued to grow. Pergamum grew as a place of learning, knowledge, and training. They were known for a place of healing. They had a lot of doctors in this city. And one of the bad things that went with that is there was this one temple dedicated to one of the Greek gods. And this temple was dedicated to this god. His symbol was snakes. All right? How many of you are creeped out already? All right. And so it's like the Indiana Jones thing where all the snakes are going all through the temple and stuff. And what their idea was is that this god who was represented by snakes, if you would go and lay down in this temple, and one of these non-poisonous snakes would rub against you or rub over you, that it was supposed to bring you healing. How many of you sign up for I'm signing up for snake therapy today. I mean, that's just, we think that's crazy, right? We think stuff like that's just really weird. But people, when they're desperate, are willing to do just about anything. They're willing to give themselves over to idols and crazy practices and weird things. I even know some friends of mine who go to a different denomination church. They were going to sell their house, and so they couldn't sell their house for month after month, and finally they buried a statue of one of the saints upside down in their front yard, and they sold their house. And I didn't say, oh, how cool. I was like, oh, how terrible. I mean, think about it. We know people like that, right? I carry my lucky rabbit's foot, or I have my whatever the object is. And, I do a little bit of that on Saturdays when Florida State is playing. I'll sit in my Florida State chair, right? I'll wear my Florida State jersey, and if I sat this way the last time they won, sure, I'm gonna sit that way. But people do this kind of stuff, and they've been doing it for centuries. And they would come to this city for healing, and they would go to this temple. It's one of those kind of things that's a symbol of Satan. It could be the place that Jesus is talking about in the passage. And can you imagine something dedicated to Satan looking like a snake? It makes sense. There are also other temples there. They were like Temple Row. Some towns we go to here in Missouri or even in Illinois, you got a Baptist church, Methodist church, Presbyterian church, you got everybody represented. Well, in this place, it was temples dedicated to the Greek gods and the Roman gods. And one of them was dedicated to Zeus, and then they had temples dedicated to Caesar Augustus and the leaders of Rome. And the cults that were connected to those were so strong and so influential in town because they were so connected to Rome that if on that one feast day a year you didn't sacrifice stuff to Caesar and you didn't take the meat from the sacrifices and stuff, you were persecuted or you were left out, or they looked at you and your family as a little strange because you didn't do the stuff that everybody else did. So it could be either the dedication to Caesar or Zeus or even this other god, but enough to say that Pergamum had all these rituals and rites and things that were totally opposite in worship from God. It was a rich city, and it was also a place that had a lot of education. The second largest library in all of antiquity, the second largest library there in the ancient world, the first one was in Alexandria, Egypt, where they had the grass. They would make papyrus, right? They would put the layers of the grass and bond them together, and they would make pages and books and codex. They would write on the pages, and their library there was incredible. Well, the guys in Pergamum got a little jealous. They're like, hey, we're a smart city. We want to do that kind of thing. And so they tried to hire some of the guys from the library at Alexandria to come hang out with them. Well, the guys in Alexandria said, no way, you're not going to take our boys. And so they stopped selling Pergamum papyrus. So Pergamum said, okay, we're going to do it our own way. They started using sheepskin and animal skins, and the vellum or the papyrus that's used, or the vellum that's used, that was designed initially in Pergamum. So all these scrolls that were used that from about 150 BC on, that came from Pergamum. They had 200,000 books in their library. So much so that Mark Antony wanted to take the library and give it to Cleopatra when he was in charge. It was simply incredible. But this place was rich, it was learned, and it was very religious, and it was very sensuous. They had all kinds of lifestyles and sexuality of all kinds, and connected with temple worship and other things. If you were to live, or you were to take your family to go live near Pergamum, good luck, and try to keep the influence of that city out of your kids. That would be almost impossible. Because it was so inviting, it had everything, it had power and authority and learning and influence, and it was the place to be. Pergamum was a powerful city. So when it comes to the idea of the church there, the church in Pergamum, Jesus writing to them saying, look, I know where you guys live. You guys live in the center of a whole lot of powerful things. You face the persecution regularly, at least once a year, with the Zeus worship and the Caesar worship that try to compel you to do these rituals, and you guys have stood the test. Man, I'm so proud of you. You even have one of your church leaders, a guy named Antipas. The name Antipas means anti, means against, and that pas means everything. Maybe he was just a grumpy old dude, I don't know, because he's against everything. It's his name, right? Antipas, against everything. But Antipas was an interesting guy. Church history tells us that during the end of the first century, during a major persecution, that they took him and roasted him alive for the sake of the gospel. He was unwilling to turn. He was unwilling to offer the sacrifices to the idols. He was unwilling to do those things. And in the Colosseum in front of everybody, they had the big bronze animal, maybe an ox or something, that they filled with fires like an oven, and they burned him alive. Jesus recognizes him and says, yet you're holding on to my name. You didn't even deny your faith in me. Even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death among you where Satan lives. Jesus, how would you like your name in the book, right? Hey, you guys are like Steve. You guys are like Susan. You guys are like Daryl. Imagine your name being written in the book that Jesus said, you guys are doing a great job, and I recognize this guy because, man, he was one of the best. Imagine having your name forever in the book for being somebody who didn't turn from Jesus. Wow. It's a high cost. Jesus is saying, you guys did some great stuff. These are awesome things. You're standing up against being swept away by the tide of the influence of the culture. And that is so hard. I know all these people up where I live, they have taken their kids out of public school. There's some great teachers in public school. But these people chose to take their kids out of public school. They wanted to protect their kids and to raise them up in their stuff. Homeschooling's not for everybody, but we did it. These folks did it. And their intention was we want to protect our kids. Yet the kids that we saw in some of those families were just like everybody else's kids. Well, why is that? Because they watch the same YouTube videos and play the same video games, and they go to the same places, and they know the same people, and they're just like everybody else. Our kids that we try to protect from our culture, man, so many times they just get swept away by it. Good kids that grow up in church, and say, oh, they started off good, and they started off, they went to vacation Bible school, they were in Sunday school, they did all these things, but ultimately they get swept away by the culture, and their life doesn't look any different than anybody else's. And our hearts are broken. Man, imagine how difficult it is these days to stand against the tide and to protect our families and our children and our people. And these people back then, they were going through the same thing, and Jesus said, good job, you guys are doing a great job. Man, I hope I've done the same. But man, it is hard, right? It's hard to stay against the temptations. It's hard to stay against that stuff. Because probably for these people back then, the ones who didn't know Jesus and weren't religious on that side, it's probably something along the same kind of lines of what we deal with today. Francis Schaeffer wrote years ago that there's a spirit, there's a way of looking at life in our culture today that's very interesting. It's almost divided. Stuff above the line and stuff below the line. And it's as if our culture has divided our living into the physical and the spiritual, like the Greeks did. Or the personal, or the public, the things that are logical, the things that are scientific, and stuff on the bottom. But the stuff on the top is the personal stuff. It's my spiritual relationship with God, or my own personal thoughts and feelings. Where the stuff on the bottom, that's stuff that we can't change, but the stuff on the top that's just my expression. It's my feelings. It's my priorities. It's my own personal things. Schaeffer says that culture today does this in such a way that we put God in a little box. That if we're looking at this spiritually, we put God on one side of the line. God is in that top thing. He's personal, subjective, and God's over there. But I live my everyday life down here. I do my own thing. God stays on his side. I stay on my side. I'll call him when I need him. Right? That's what people do in our culture. They get in a car accident, and all of a sudden it's Jesus take the wheel. Right? The whole rest of the time it's on the highway to, somewhere else. Right? But that's what we do. It's almost divided. There are a lot of people who say, I can't believe you said that in church. Well, isn't Jesus the same every place? I can't believe you say that anywhere. Right? Or, we don't do that on Sundays. What, you do it the rest of the week? You have divided your life in such a way that God doesn't come into your stuff. God doesn't come into your everyday decisions in life. You've divided God from your important decisions to such a point that I can do whatever I want, and God, I'll come to you when I need to confess something or ask for forgiveness, or when I need you, when I'm desperate. It's what our culture does. We take it to the point that the God stuff is on one side, and then I can live however I want. I can indulge in whatever sin I want to. I'm free. I'm free to do whatever I want. I can live sexually, or I can live financially. I can do whatever I want. I'm free. I am free to do whatever I want. And the crazy thing is that freedom ultimately leads to bondage, because then you can't get away from the thing you indulged in over and over and over and over. You get trapped by the culture. You get sucked in. The funny thing is with that, with all the God stuff, and I look at these people here, and they're just like us. People in our culture today, and people in church do it a lot. There are two things. Their response to God's standard looks like this. First, it's reduction. Hey, I know that's what God says, but I'm not doing that. Or, hey, God's stuff is over there, but God has these great standards, and if you're really, a churchgoer, you love God and everything, you're all in, that's fine. But I'm not that person, and I'm living my life, I'm just not there. That's them, that's not me, and so we tolerate doing things second rate for God. It's a reduction. That's just what church people do, or that's what the super spiritual people do, but I don't have time for that. We reduce it to, I'm just this. Or we rationalize it. Hey, we're going to get married soon, so it's okay. How about this one? Many young adults, or all kinds of people these days, hey, we're just going to live together. We're going to try it out. We're going to try out this relationship and this, we're going to, walk through the motions. And if we live together long enough and we see that this is going to work, we'll get married. We justify it. We rationalize it. We say God's stuff over there, but that doesn't happen. That's not necessary in my real everyday life. And so we, in a physical, emotional, spiritual, sexual kind of way, we act to do our own things in God's standard over there. And it's not just young people. I mean, they're to the point in some places where they're passing out Viagra in senior adult homes. Or how about this one? Oh, my support check's coming in, and if I'm married, I only get this much, but if I'm single, I get more. And or how about my health care? And so there are good people who are getting divorced for financial reasons or health care reasons, but they still live together and they still act like, oh, we're just getting a legal thing, but spiritually, religiously, we're still married. I even know people who didn't want to compromise their government assistance on one thing, so they had somebody at a church they know marry them in a religious ceremony, but they didn't get the legal state things because, we're married in God's eyes. We're not married in the state's eyes, so they can still get their benefits. Wow. God has a standard. Here's God's standard. In emotional, physical, spiritual, sexual kind of things. One man, one woman, one lifetime in the context of a marriage. We've been doing that for millennia. And here in our culture today, our culture says, hey, marriage is optional. We do that after the fact. We'll wait. We'll have multiple partners. We'll have multiple this. We'll have multiple that. We'll try out everything and then still think that God will honor it. And in the context of church, I hear so many young adults who are living together or fooling around or this or that or whatever, and it's no big deal. Now, all of us make all kinds of mistakes. We all do all kinds of stupid stuff. Amen or oh me? Oh me. We all do stupid kind of stuff. But what did Jesus do with the lady caught in adultery? Which I often think, where was the dude? Because you can't commit adultery by yourself. Where was the guy? But the lady caught in adultery, what did he say to her? Go and sin no more. He forgave her. And he said, don't do this anymore. What do we do in our culture? It's all okay. You live together, you this, you that, whatever. It's all okay. We don't want to judge. We don't want to make somebody feel bad. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And so all the stuff that happens behind closed doors and the stuff that we don't see, either in our own lives or other people's lives, we don't want to judge. We don't want to say anything. We don't want them to leave church. I had a situation where I was pastoring the church. A couple was living together, and people didn't want me to say anything from the pulpit that says, God has a standard. Don't do that. You're going to hurt yourself in the long run. But we as the church, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We don't want to say anything. And so we tolerate a whole bunch of stuff in ourselves and in other people. And it's a little... I was reminded so much so in reading this passage in a couple of other churches, because watch what Jesus said. This is Jesus. This is red letters in your Bible. Even on your screen, it might be red letters. It says this. It says, but I got a few things against you. This is Jesus speaking. He takes these things seriously. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam. What is that? It's an Old Testament guy who couldn't put any curses on the people of God back there in Numbers, I think it's 25. He couldn't curse the people. Nothing would happen with it. And so he got this great scheme. Why don't I just get them to eat the meat sacrificed to idols and get them to fool around? And guess what? People were willing to do that. And the sin came through the people of Israel, and God condemned it then, and he condemns it now. He says, there's some of the teaching of Balaam who taught Balak to place a stumbling block in front of the Israelites. He meat sacrificed to idols and commit sexual immorality. Why? Because they were trying to get the judgment of God on the people. In the same way, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Who's that? Scholars go back and forth trying to figure out who that is. It could be an early church father who became an apostate. It was somebody who was willing to tolerate still coming to church and doing the things in church, but living wild however they wanted. So you have those who teach that. You can. There was a big stink online several weeks back. There was this girl on this show, I guess it was The Bachelor or something. You know, I've seen that and go, wow, give him a rose kind of thing. I don't know anything about that show. But this girl on the TV show, and then it came out on social media, yep, I'm a Christian, but I can fool around with everybody on this show and it not be a big deal. And you shouldn't question me being a Christian. Yep, that's what I was thinking. Siri, tell me a Bible verse. I'm surprised somebody's phone call. I was just trying. Is that good? Make sure you vote on time. Sorry, Lord. But this is what our culture does. And people claim to be Christians. I can live wild as a rabbit and still say I'm in good standing with God. No, the heart of God weeps. It's what you're doing to yourself. And I don't have time to go into the biological and the psychological stuff that has to do with that whole area. I'm just talking on the spiritual, scriptural side. God says don't. He's put up guardrails to say don't get out of bounds. The standard, I mean, this is a big deal. Yet we in church, we cast it off like no big deal. I've heard all these younger, young angry preachers. This is the guys I hang out with. It's usually the angry ones with a goatee or something. And it's these young pastor guys, and they pitched out stuff like true love weights or abstinence training or any of that kind of stuff. Well, we don't want to shove that down kids' throats. Well, what are we going to do? Pass out little things in a wrapper and say, hey, go for it? I mean, serious. It breaks the heart of God. Because there's a connection with the physical and the spiritual. There's no dividing line with stuff above the line and stuff below the line. It's not dualistic like that. It's holistic. That my physical body and my spiritual body are connected. One example of this, the hookup culture in our world, right? That there's clean lines between it. I can have physical relationship with all kinds of people and do everything, but my emotions and stuff are something different. That my physical body, my spirit, my emotions, and my God stuff are two different things. And so I can do anything in my physical body. I can do anything. It's just a piece of meat. But my emotions and my spiritual stuff is over there. No, God said they're all connected. That's right. You are one person. There was a guy, late 50s, early 60s. There's a big movement of atheists coming along at this point. Post-World War II. Guys who were responding to the difficulties and stuff of the Second World War, and they're coming out philosophically saying, we might as well eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. There's nothing after this. The guy who wrote the book Brave New World, some of us had to read it in school, but didn't. Some of us, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. Him and all these atheist guys, made a decision to become atheists. And it was interesting. Huxley said this, he says, we chose our worldview and our philosophy of life, we chose our connection with religion based on our morality. And we didn't want Christianity telling us what to do with our sexuality and our physical lives and all that kind of stuff. We didn't want Christianity and these old world values to do that, and so we picked atheism because it supported our lifestyle. I know young adults who leave the church, they get to college, and they go live wild, and they don't go to church anymore. Well, why would you want to? You feel guilty going to church because you're living and doing crazy stuff. And they're choosing. I know a great guy. He grew up in a youth group in a church I used to be at. He was one of the leaders in the youth group. He goes off to Mizzou. He goes to college, and he leaves church totally. He drinks like a fish and is wild. And I look at the kid, and he's a man. I look at this man, and I think, you've thrown away all these great things for a few minutes. And what does that do to the heart? Our culture looks at sexuality kind of stuff in four major different ways. There's a romantic view that makes absolute your feelings. Well, I just don't feel like I'm in love with this person anymore. I feel like I'm in love with this person. I feel that I'm this and I feel that I'm that. And people go so much with their feelings that they're not a whole person emotionally unless they satisfy their feelings. You hear that everywhere. The Playboy view makes absolute the value of physical pleasure. I want to do this. I'm in this for me. You know, it doesn't matter. God has His standard, but this is I'm all natural. I'm doing what comes natural to me. The therapeutic view makes absolute the idea of psychological fulfillment. Well, I need to do these things so that I can be a whole person. Whatever my insides tell me to do, I'm going to go do that, and it makes me be more of a person. You go down magazines, male and female magazines at the grocery store, and they have articles on this stuff all the time. Pop psychology stuff affirms this all the time. And then you have the pagan view, which makes absolute the relative value of spirituality as a self-defined experience. Folks, do you realize that the physical relationship that we can have with another person, your connection with that is directly connected to your relationship with God? And it looks like this. In pagan cultures, they would have temple prostitutes because part of the worship of their deity was to go participate in that kind of stuff. People outside in other cultures that don't have Judeo-Christian values and principles, they'll go do whatever as a part of their personal experience, right? But for the Christian, for those who claim to be followers of Jesus, we limit that part of our physical, emotional, spiritual stuff in the context of marriage. Who would do that? We are all grown-ups. We all, have emotional, physical, spiritual needs. We want to go do, whatever we want to do. And the only reason we limit those things is to say, I have a relationship with God that is more valuable than my temporary satisfaction. I have a relationship with God that is more important than these things. And I'm going to limit myself for the place that God has for me with the right person, right time, right, context. I'm going to limit those things because I'm in a relationship with God. And here's the crazy thing. In our culture today, if you, say, I've never had those experiences, they look at you like you're crazy. For teenagers today, the expectation is you're going to do whatever and try out everything. And there's a connection between that stuff and your relationship with God. So much so that there are things in our culture now that are super freaky. Like, I didn't think I'd see this kind of stuff except in pagan cultures years ago. There's a lady that we know. Her name is Beyonce. And during one of the music awards this year, she came out in an outfit that shouldn't be on TV. She was wearing stuff that made her look like the sun god, and she sat down with the dancers at her table like a mock Lord's Supper. And the people in the thing looked at her and bowed down to her. They looked to her and bowed down to her as deity, and they in many ways worshipped her and her expression of female sexuality. And I looked at it, I couldn't believe it was on TV. And it's blatant wide open. And she's not the only one who's doing this kind of stuff. But here's the crazy thing. There are churches in America that are taking the Beyonce experience, the Beyonce mass, and they're taking it to their churches and celebrating female sexuality in the context of the church as a place of freedom and self-expression. I almost don't know what to do with it. There are pagan rituals that are taking place in the church right now. The new pope, the guy from Central America, highly influenced by Marxism and stuff from his culture. They did a worship thing in the Vatican recently, and they had this statue, and it looked like a very simple, iconic statue of Mary and the baby. But what they found out is that this statue and multiple statues were statues to the fertility god of the culture of the Incas. That they had been praying around and singing praises around this idol. And some of the priests at the Vatican found out what this thing was, and they took it, stole it out of the Vatican. It's like some movie or something, right? We stole this out of the Vatican, They stole it out of the Vatican and pitched it in the Tiber River there in Rome. They got rid of it because they understood that all of a sudden it's not just someplace else, but this pagan spirituality connected with sexuality is right there in the middle of the church. It's a little blatant for them, but it's very subtle for us. We get in trouble for saying this is right and this is wrong. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. But it looks to me like Jesus was hurting their feelings. That he said, take this stuff seriously. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians that sexual sins that we do, they're not just stuff outside the body, they're inside the body. They're connected to us. There's biochemical stuff that takes place. There's emotional, physical, psychological stuff. And the spiritual implications that I am joining myself against God. Join with somebody else. 1 Thessalonians says, hey, don't defile a brother or sister. Don't do that kind of thing. Many of us in this room, we've made mistakes. Some of us have had stuff done to us, and some of us it's stuff that we've done ourselves. But the cool thing is that God gives forgiveness. In 1 Corinthians, it says some of you guys were like this, and he gives this long list of sins. He says, this was some of you. But you've been cleansed, you've been forgiven, you've been set free. It's a million little decisions that take us to a place of righteousness and grace and forgiveness and being able to understand how God has made us, and we don't go back. We extend grace to people who've made mistakes. Probably because most of us in this room have too. But there's a high and holy standard. And that if we in the church don't say anything so that we don't hurt somebody's feelings, we may be the ones who Jesus comes to and says, you know, you guys are great, you've done a lot of good things, but I got something against you. You have tolerated immorality in your midst, and you haven't said a word. You tolerated it, put up with it. You swept it under the rug. You've done nothing about it. And I'm not saying we pillory people or take them up front and point fingers at them or anything, but I'm saying that we, the people of God, we need to do something different. And Jesus says, hey, you guys who do something different, he says, first, repent, because otherwise I'll come quickly and I'll fight against you with the sword of my mouth. Wow. Jesus himself. He says, let anyone who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Do this stuff. Repent. Have a high and holy standard. Turn away from your past and lean into holiness and forgiveness. Be a different people who your connection emotionally, physically, spiritually, all that stuff is connected with God. In the right place, in the right time, with the right person. And he says to the ones who do it, to the conquerors, I'll give you hidden manna. What is that? Passage doesn't say. Some people refer to it as maybe that connection with Jesus, the overcomers. He also says, I'll give him a white stone. In Pergamum and in some of the Greek games, sometimes not only would they put a laurel wreath on people's heads, but they would give them a white stone, a diamond, to say, you were the victor. They would give them something precious and of high value. In some of the cultures, they would even, in a courtroom, the people on the jury would vote, and they'd have a black bead, a black stone and a white stone, and if they voted for somebody to be not guilty or not condemned, they would put in the white stone. Or even in Jewish culture, they saw the idea of the white stone as something precious, and if their name was put on a high value. So the picture here of those who try to live right and do right, not because of self-righteousness, but because of God's righteousness. And Paul said, I don't want to have a righteousness of my own, but I want to have a righteousness which is of God, and by faith I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and share in the fellowship of his sufferings, Philippians 3. I want to be one of those guys who gets a white stone. It's symbolic in this, but it's the picture that you followed me, you trusted me, you confessed your sins, you tried to do the right thing. And to get the white stone, you've been declared forgiven, and you've been declared the victor. We look at this kind of stuff, we don't talk about this kind of stuff in church. We don't want to mention some of these words. But if we don't talk about it with our kids by the time 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, the school system will, and it may not be something that is consistent with our values. We've got to talk about these things, even among adults. Because I see as much of it among adults my age and older as I do my kids' age and younger. I see adults who are willing to play fast and loose with their relationships and with the things that they do, and they sweep it under the rug, they rationalize it, and they put it away. Oh, we ought to be people who are holy. We ought to be people. 1 Peter says, be holy as I'm holy. You know what? I've made my mistakes. I made a lot of them. I confess my sin to God, and He cleansed me from my sin. And all unrighteousness is what it says in 1 John. And I don't have a righteousness of my own, because if it was up to me, I'd have filthy rags. But I had taken off the old man. I'm not perfect. I've taken off the old man, and I put on the new man. You know what the new man gets? He gets a new suit. That's good. He's clothed with righteousness, or she's clothed with righteousness. And we get to stand before the Master and Him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. He forgives our sins. He heals us and restores us. And we as God's people need to figure out a gracious way to represent the good and the right and the holy in our culture. Because God thinks it's important. And we ought to think it's important too. Would you pray with me? God, I have my own sin. You know it. And it was paid for by the blood of Jesus when I confessed my sin to you. You made me clean and holy and brand new. I am not bound by my mistakes of the past. I am not bound by what was done to me in the past or whatever. I am brand new, holy, clean, and I thank you. And God, I pray that you help me to prioritize all the areas of my life. There's no dividing line. Help me to take the physical and the spiritual, my stuff and God's stuff, and put it all in one pile, because it's all connected. Help me to communicate these things graciously to my kids and the young adults and the people in my church. God, help me to be holy and to help others to do the same, not in a place of self-righteousness or condemnation or judgment, but God, that you have a standard and you want us to live it. And you're someday going to hold us accountable. So God, we as a people, we confess our sin to you. Stuff that we haven't done right. We confess our lack of priority of doing things your way in everything. So forgive us and cleanse us. Thank you, God, for being consistent with your word and setting me free and saying, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am good and loved and forgiven. And God, today, I pray for us as a church, a body of believers, and us in this culture. We're sitting in the culture of Satan in many ways. The culture wants to come against us. The culture tells us to act their way, or they're going to judge us, or they're going to persecute us, even in little ways, God. I pray that no matter what the opposition is, God, that we graciously stand for what's good and right and holy and true.